Hello. I'm going to do another Doctor Who review of a classic Doctor Who episode. It was recently, a couple of days ago, the 100th anniversary of the birth of Jon Pertwee, who played the Third Doctor. So I'm going to review one of his episodes, the Frontier in Space. Um, Perhaps not one of the best of his episodes, but one of the reasons I want to review this one rather than one of the numerous other episodes he did, is because he said the alien, or well, one of the alien species in this, the Draconians, who are these big sort of lizard-like things with very pointy heads and warty skin. He said Jon Pertwee, that is, said that the Draconians were his very favourite alien that he appeared alongside during his period on the show. He was there for 4 years. And the reason they were his favourite out of all the various things, creatures and monsters and whatnot he appeared alongside, is because they have a culture, a discernible, identifiable culture. Whereas most of the other creatures that he appeared alongside were just sort of deranged robots and things with tentacles screaming and shouting and trying to destroy life, the universe, and everything for no particularly complicated reason. So that because these creatures they weren't villains, they were well, long story short of the plot, the human empire in the future and the Draconian empire of the future, two huge, vast empires who've got a frontier in space, a sort of I was going to say a no man's land, but maybe a no creature's land in space. Which is the buffer zone for their two empires, and they are gradually, as the episode unfolds, being drawn towards war. There's already been a war between them in the past, and peace has settled in, but it's a very uneasy peace. And stick your fingers in your ears if you don't want the resolution of the episode spoiled. But by the end of it, it turns out that the attacks on Draconian ships by humans and on human ships by Draconians is being set up by a third party, someone who is playing both sides off against each other in order to instigate a massive war between the two empires, with the intention that once that war is over, they'll come in and slaughter whoever the survivor is. So they'll wipe out both empires, in effect. So it's they're being played for fools, but eventually the true baddies of the picture are brought forward and held to account, and the war is averted. And obviously the Doctor and Joe Manning, his companion in this one, are instrumental in bringing that about. And I think the comment that Pertwee made after the episode was over, when he was being interviewed, about the fascination he had for Draconian culture, it's kind of the style of clothing and everything else. It's sort of reminiscent of feudal Japan in a way, and I think kind of inspired by samurai costumes and that sort of thing to base the look and the image of the Draconians on. Um, I think that's something that Doctor Who does often miss in its almost 6 decade run, is that quite often the monster of the week is just some mad thing with tentacles running around killing people for no particularly convoluted reason. And the creatures that appear don't often have what you would call a culture. So particularly in the new series, you get lots of creatures, aliens that are what you would call, well, what I would call at any rate, conceptual aliens. So a good example out of the Weeping Angels, who are really effective as a very creepy, menacing alien presence, at least until they try to make the Empire, the Statue of Liberty rather, into a Weeping Angel, which was just ludicrous. But up to that point, they were very effective species. But they work as an idea, the moving statue, and that's kind of it as far as a weeping angel goes. A moving statue that can send you back in time. They don't have a culture. How do they mate? They can't look at each other, because as soon as something looks at them, they turn back to stone, and they can't move anymore, and that includes each other. There was the one episode where a gang of weeping angels have gathered around the TARDIS and they're rocking it back and forth in the dark. And as soon as the TARDIS dematerializes and the lights come on, the angels are all looking at each other and they freeze back to stone. So how on earth does a species reproduce or socialize or do anything if they can't even interact with each other except in pitch blackness? What's going on there? So it doesn't work terribly well as a culture, a sense that these are thinking, motivated beings who have loves and hopes and hates and dreams and all the things that we're used to creatures having. Whereas the Draconians, it's a very male-dominated society. It's a very imperialist society. It has a feudal alliance to the emperor and all of this sort of thing. It's a plausible, believable society. And I think Doctor Who would benefit from bringing in more creatures like that. You don't have to have every single episode with a convoluted culture, but alongside the weird monster of the week bit, every now and then to have a more complex and more sophisticated and more interesting species that the Doctor can interact with, whether they are terrible villains, whether they're heroic, kind of friendly aliens, or whether they're rather neutral and somewhere in the middle of all that, doesn't matter, so long as they're interesting and plausible and believable as a species. Something I would like to see more of in the series at any rate. And I would like to see the Draconians come back, although I'm loath to see it with the current director, because I didn't like the redesign of the Silurians, which I appreciate was a different director anyway. But my worry would be they'd do such a kind of tarted up version of the Draconians that if they did bring them back, they wouldn't look anything like the original Draconians, and it would kind of spoil the look of the thing. So I prefer to wait until there's a showrunner in charge who is more of a traditionalist, who likes to keep the old look of things. And I can understand, new CGI technologies, new latex mask making technologies. They could get quite a fancier looking Draconian, but something that is still basically the same as the original, rather than anything too far removed, is what I would like to see. Anyway, I can remember seeing this episode first time around as a child, very, very young child. I have sort of very sporadic memories of it, but I rewatched it as a teenager on reruns and as an adult on DVD. One of the other creatures in it, there's a number of different aliens in this particular program, and one of the other ones are the Ogrons, who scared the crap out of me as a child. I had nightmares about Ogrons. These huge, sort of 6'6" lumbering gorilla type things, somewhere between a caveman and a gorilla, and they kind of just lumber along, and they're not particularly bright or particularly clever. They're just rather brutal and stupid and unpleasant, and they're employed as thugs by cleverer species than they are. But it was their sort of brutishness and the fact that they looked as if they had just ripped your arms and legs off for fun that gave me nightmares as a child. And that can kind of work quite well. They've got that sort of air of the brain dead playground bully about them, which is quite menacing in a show that is directed at least quite heavily towards young children and their fears and their worries and so forth. So that one works quite well. It's also an episode featuring the Master, and as played by the original actor Roger Delgado, who, according to all the various different sources I've read, was an absolutely lovely man in real life and totally unlike the sinister and menacing villain that he played. It was sadly the very last time he played the Master, because he died a couple of months afterwards in a traffic accident. But the intention had been that the following year they would do an episode with the working draft title of The Final Game, which would be the last time the Master officially appeared, and it would kind of tie up his storylines and reveal exactly the nature of his relationship to the Doctor and how it all panned out. And there's various different kind of rumours about what that would have been. And the draft sketch of that episode says that at the end of it, something would happen and the Doctor's life would be in absolute danger, and the Master, in this sort of sudden tweak of conscience, would leap forward and save the Doctor from dying and himself die in the process, sort of take a bullet for the Doctor, as it were. And probably an explosion, the Master would be blown to smithereens and there'd be nobody to regenerate. That would be the end of him. Job done. No more appearances in Doctor Who. Obviously, that didn't happen with the death of the actor. They sort of put the character on ice, and then eventually, years and years and years later, it was brought back with other actors, and eventually we ended up with Michelle Gomez as the female version of the Master, who was highly entertaining, very, very, very talented actress. Although personally, I think they would be much better off having her as an original character rather than this sort of kind of psychotic Mary Poppins character that they've got. Simply because she was funny rather than menacing, whereas Roger Delgado had just been plain nasty. He was going around murdering people left, right, and centre. He was just a horrible piece of work, and wasn't trying to play it for laughs. He was trying to play it for menace, and I think that worked very well in The Master as a character. John Sims went the same kind of route that Michelle Gomez did, of playing it more as a comic character rather than as a real malevolent, malign character. And I think Doctor Who does benefit from having some humour. You know, there's always humour in Doctor Who, and that's good. But it benefits from having a real threat as well. People who you know would kind of strangle puppies for a laugh. They are that deranged and demented, and are frightening for the audience. They are sinister characters, and you don't know who they're going to kill next, what they're going to get up to next. You don't need the constant humour all the time. There are other characters for that. You need the occasional really good villain on that front. One of the other interesting features of Frontier in Space is that Earth, by the period of history that this is set in the year 2450, Earth has united. So it's a global planet, a stupid thing to say, a global political alliance. So rather than lots and lots of different countries, each with their own leaders and so forth, there is a president of the world, a world order, which is something that many people are now scared to death of and see the world order as a scary, threatening thing. But when this was produced, it was seen as a kind of a way of bringing about world peace. That each country would have its own administrators, but there would be a global president who was elected and all the rest of it. They do talk about elections in this, and there's a sort of a rival candidate for election who also appears very, very briefly on a newscast. But the president in this is a madam president, is a woman, which again is kind of very forward thinking, and for those people who think feminism was only invented quite recently and introduced to Doctor Who, clear sign that actually going back to Pertwee's era and beforehand, they were thinking about these things. What would one day in the future there could be not only female prime ministers and so forth, but actually the leader of the entire planet could be female, and they were planning ahead. Played by an actress called Vera Fuzek, who didn't do a great deal else after that. She sort of seems to have largely retired from TV. Maybe a bit of stage work, I don't know about her stage career, but TV-wise, she didn't do a great deal more after Doctor Who. But presented a very interesting character and kind of explored issues that people were thinking about in the 70s and the early 70s. Beyond that, I don't know, there's an awful lot else I want to say about it. Some people have criticised Frontier in Space as being a little bit drawn out. It is quite slow at points, and both the Doctor and Joe Grant, I said Joe Manning earlier, it's Katie Manning is the actress, isn't it? Sorry, just realised that. But Joe Grant, the character, spend a lot of time being locked up in the holds of spaceships. The Doctor gets imprisoned on the Moon Penal Colony. Obviously, this is the point in time when the people, whoever it was that built the Moon Penal Colony, hadn't realised that the Moon was actually a giant egg. Which is another example of where modern Doctor Who has just kind of got stupid at times. You get these fantastic actors like Peter Capaldi, and they come up with really crappy scripts about the Moon being a giant egg. What's that about? But they went to build a penal colony in there, and they obviously didn't drill deep enough through the eggshell to realise what the Moon really was. There's a number of times in Doctor Who where they've referenced creatures living on the Moon. Not the weird spidery things that were in the Moon Egg episode, but some sort of sentient species. It would be nice to know a little bit more about who they are and what they are, and presumably they all died horribly when the eggshell of the Moon cracked open. and a new one was hatched by the weird space dragon thing, whatever it was meant to be. But that will be an interesting future episode, maybe, in a few years' time, to find out a little bit more about that. Given time travel, they could go back to the old moon and to see the creatures that were living there then, rather than the hatched moon, which all gets a bit strange and a bit bizarre. There's quite a lot of politics, and it's obviously the whole episode was influenced by global politics of the time and concerns that governments can be manipulated by what is really tantamount to a kind of an outside terrorist force. And you think perhaps bringing forward a few decades into our present time, you've got all these worries about Russia and China and various different countries who maybe are alleged to be using computer hacking techniques and putting out false news and creating false social media accounts to disseminate arguments and ideas on the media sites of other countries in order to influence an election this way, influence an election that way, make this politician very unpopular, or build up the popularity of some other politician. There's kind of what's going on with the Master and the Daleks and the Draconians and the Ogrons and the humans. There's all this sort of manipulation of wind-up and all kinds of sinister things going on. So it's in some ways it's sort of prophetic as to the way not only world politics was sans the high level of information technology in the early 70s, but also how it still is now with high levels of information technology to manipulate people with. And just to show, before I stop talking, I am now wearing another Doctor Who t-shirt, the exploding Vincent van Gogh TARDIS there. It's apparently got two, so I might not do many more podcasts because I'll run out of things to wear. So I'll leave that one there. And so I really loved Jon Pertwee as a Doctor. I thought he was an absolutely fantastic Doctor. The more you learn about his life, his real life, Jon Pertwee's life, the more intriguing he is as a person. All sorts of incredible things he got up to during the war and so forth. And his son Sean Pertwee did a really nice, or somebody made a really nice little podcast, little documentary thing, with him reflecting on his father's life to mark the 100th anniversary from his birth, and saying really nice things about his father and so on, which is very good to see. And we've had a builder in to put in some new windows. It did not look like Sean Pertwee. Even sounded quite like Sean Pertwee, I have to say, which is a little bit surreal. And also one of the reasons why I finally got round to recording this podcast today. I meant to do it a few days ago, closer to the anniversary. But watch it if you haven't. It's very good. And let me know if you have any interest in more discussions about Doctor Who, or if this is a subject that, for the various subscribers to this channel, is boring you to tears. Thank you.